deciding to play it snug.
675.
Maybe really actually trying to fold his way to heads up. If not literally, then spiritually.
Punsri, a spirited open with 10-3 suited. King Jack has done well for Ivey already. Putting it to use once more in the form of a flat. So 1.5 million plus in the middle.
We are taking a look at a wild spot playing 7-handed in a $50,000 buy-in tournament at the final table. Folds around to Punnat Punsri in the small blind with 25 big blinds, 5 million chips. He makes it 675,000 with 10-3 of hearts. I'm not sure of the other stack depths at the table, but this is certainly a spot where he's going to want to be a little bit cautious, given the great Phil Ivey is in the big blind with a bigger stack than him. That said, Punnat's not afraid. He raises it up with the 10-3 of hearts. Phil Ivey looks down at King of Hearts, Jack of Clubs in the big blind. This is a spot where he can call very, very wide because he is the bigger stack at the final table in position. So he's definitely going to stick around with the King Jack. Let's head to the flop.
10-3 suited at 2-1 dog here. Oh my.
I think you can increase the 2-1 to 9-1 plus as bottom pair and backdoor hearts have run into the nuts on the ace-queen-10 flop.
So this is a flop that favors Punsri in terms of his range. His actual hand doesn't mind checking, which makes for an interesting kind of dynamic. A board you expect bets, but the hand checks. What does that mean? Does that mean our opponent has weak showdown a lot? This would be an interesting spot for Ivey to actually check back, in my opinion, versus that range. Ivey comes with bet.
400,000.
Obviously reasonable with the nuts, but versus a showdown range, slow playing as him is also something that would...
The flop comes Ace of Diamonds, Queen of Hearts, 10 of Spades, giving Punnat bottom pair, no kicker, and a backdoor flush draw, and Phil Ivey the Broadway straight. Punnat with his very obvious marginal made hand, opposite check, and then Phil Ivey decides to go for a small bet. This is an interesting scenario where if Punnat has an ace, a queen, or a 10, he's probably not going to fold to any reasonable bet, but if he does have a bad 10, he may fold it to a, let's say, half pot bet in this scenario, given a bad 10 is not in great shape. So Ivey does go for a 25-ish% pot bet, which I think is fine. That said, this might be a spot where you can just slow play, because if Punnat does have an ace that's playing it slowly or some other very strong hand, you're probably going to stack him anyway, given the pot's already 1.5 million and there's only 5 million remaining in the stacks. And here you really want your opponent to catch up with whatever nonsense they have. Imagine Punnat has, I don't know, 8-7 offsuit instead of 10-3. He's just going to fold to any bet, right? So I think checking it back may be ideal, not necessarily to let them improve to a decent hand, but to give them the chance to bluff, right? Because if Punnat has 8 high out of position on the river or on the turn, he might start to feel somewhat inclined to bluff. That said, if you are going to bet, I do like the small bet from Ivey because that gives Punnat every possible opportunity to bluff raise with a random king or a jack or turn bottom pair into a bluff. So, fine and good. He goes for the small bet. Punnat opts to call. Let's head to the turn.
Would have been interesting. Oh.
I want to talk about interesting. How about this jack? An unwelcome sight for obvious reasons for Phil, as any King X now shares Broadway with him. Little does he know that the heart draw has materialized across the way for Punsri, who did call the 400, now checks with 2.35 in the middle.
Yeah, after betting flop.
The turn is the Jack of Hearts, giving Punnat a flush draw now. It's way better than bottom pair, no kicker. Punnat checks. And then Phil Ivey, a bit to my surprise, checked behind. I think this is a situation where, given the pot's 2.3 million with 4.6 million remaining in the stacks, you just want to get money in the pot. This is also a spot where it's really, really easy for Punnat to have something at this point, because he'd probably fold all of his garbage on the flop, which means he probably has an ace or a queen or a jack or a king. If he has a king, it doesn't matter because you're chopping. But I think this is a spot where you do want to just get a little bit more money in the pot. Notice if Ivey bets 600,000 on the turn. If Punnat has an ace or two pair, he's just not going to fold. Now, you may say, would he really have two pair given he checked and called the flop? He could. I mean, ace jack certainly a hand that could raise pre-flop and then check call the flop because it's so good. Maybe a hand like jack 10 or queen jack. These hands make a lot of sense as well. And those hands are not going to fold to a small bet. So I think Ivey probably wants to just nudge some money in the pot, but I'm going to default to whatever Ivey does. He's one of the greatest poker players who have ever lived. He lets it go check, check. Let's head to the river.
Oh, now Phil decides to slow play. Oh, my.
Backdoor flush comes on in for Punsri after the check back from Ivey.
Wow, what a terrible run out for Phil.
Just filthy. Punsri's run very well in this one thus far. This is not to take anything away from his talents whatsoever.
And so Punsri's not going to be able to put Phil on a straight very often. Checks it anyway, which is quite interesting. Maybe he's likely going for check raise, which is going to put Phil in the blender. I don't think Phil is going to pass up value betting now after checking back. And Phil comes with third pot, which is a pretty small sizing. And definitely his hand could bet more than this, so.
You surprised to see Punnat check and risk Ivey not barreling here? Delighted, of course, to see him fire this 800,000. As he holds the third nuts.
Yeah, mildly surprised, but it ended up working out for him because Phil actually did check back a king on the turn.
Now Punsri using the time banks.
And now, I mean, I think his decision is exactly how much he wants to raise. You know, he has the 10, but there's only two bigger flushes, the king and ace high flush, and Phil not three betting pre removes. Definitely removes ace king of hearts.
3.4 million.
Check raise here, and that is a very surprising encounter for Ivey as played. An open pre-flop to 675. A check call of 400. Turn goes check, check. And now we are being check raised from 800K up to 3.4. Does this king jack beat anything? And note the relevance of the king of hearts in hand.
The river is a disastrous 9 of hearts. It's going to be some heartbreak for Phil Ivey. Punnat does not bet. He opts to check. This is a great spot to check because if Ivey has a medium strength hand, like one pair, he's probably going to fold to any bet. And if he does have a straight, he's definitely going to value bet himself, even if he has the low end of it. Notice an 8 makes a straight as well now. So Punnat checks. Ivey does go for value. 800K, just trying to get called by a lot of medium-ish strength junky hands. And then Punnat brings in the raise. 3.4 million. Definitely a weird raise size given he only has 1.2 behind. This is something you will want to do at final tables when there are big payout implications. I'm kind of surprised he left himself the full 1.2 as opposed to perhaps a little bit less, because when Punnat does check raise the river, I think he's going to be super polarized to either a flush or a king or a bluff. So I think he can probably just go bigger. But again, Punnat's playing these games all day, every day. I'm going to default to whatever he thinks in this scenario. 3.4 million. Let's see what Ivey does.
Yeah, no, the king of hearts is a very relevant card because, as we can see, Punnat check raised the 10 high flush, so he would also be willing to do it with even bigger flushes, which Phil's blocking one of those. So that might. This is a really tricky spot. I mean, Phil has a pretty good hand and a pretty good bluff catcher having the king of hearts. Very tough fold, but this is the type of spot that maybe might make Ivey.
A few moments later.
Because, I mean, you're sort of not doing it for value. If you're check raising, you're kind of hoping to get Ivey to fold a chop. If you're doing it with like king 10 or ace king with one of those being a heart.
Well, it isn't often we see Phil Ivey in the blender, but that's exactly where he finds himself here.
Phil Ivey's been in the tank for almost 9 minutes on this decision. Not gonna lie, I just would have called it off given I had the king of hearts, but not Ivey. He's actually giving it a ton of legitimate thought, which is one of the reasons Ivey is one of the greatest poker players to ever live. What I want to know is, do you think he's going to find the call or the fold? He has no time banks left. He has to come to a decision soon. Let me know in the comments section below. Call or fold. And while you're down there, click the like and subscribe button for me.
Critical decision on his hand. Let's observe.
I would say the king, if he folds with the king of hearts, it's a really good fold.
One eternity later.
When you take this long, it's really nice to be right, and it really hurts when you're wrong. Oh no.
Did he say call?
He did.
Yeah. And you're not wrong. Obviously, the incineration of all of those time banks and a regrettable number of additional chips, 2.6 million of them to be exact. A painful blow. But in the end, Ivey not able to find the fold.
After a lot of deliberation, Phil Ivey makes the call. And I certainly do not fault him for making this call. I think 99.9% of poker players would have made this call, and the 0.1% that folded are super nits. That said, if there's ever a player who can make a read and find a fold, it's Ivey. The problem, though, here is that your opponent could just have a king. The king's a hand that's definitely good enough to check raise in the spot, and you also block the king of hearts. Sometimes you're just destined to lose a bunch of chips, even if you're Phil Ivey.